Okay. As I've been doing recently, these talks are based on the Pasha of the week, but then we draw from that which is meaningful and pertinent to us. The Pasha of the week, as we will see, the major point which we want to bring out is also very, very closely related to Hanukkah, to the principle of Hanukkah. You know that the Pasha of the week is Vayigash Yehuda, that Yehuda approached Yosef. And when Yehuda approached Yosef, then the whole situation turned around, and Yosef identified himself to his brothers, and this was like a geula. They came out from a very, very difficult moment to a very rich moment. It's explained that Yehuda and Yosef are both, within the Jewish people, they're both kings. Yehuda is a king, everybody knows Yehuda is a king. Malcha Beis David is from Yehuda. And Yosef was also king. Besides that Yosef was a king in Mitzrayim, but later on, the Jewish nation split into two kingdoms. There was Malcha. Why are you sitting in the back? There were two kingdoms. There was Malchus Yehuda or Malchus Yisrael, which was essentially the kings there were from Yosef. As a matter of fact, the Malchus Yisrael, that part of the kingdom, was many times the size of Malcha Yehuda. In Yisrael there were 10 shvatim, 10 tribes, and in Yehuda there were only 2 tribes. This situation of having 2 kingdoms in the Jewish nation had a very great significance. It wasn't just a political fallout, as we see superficially, that they didn't get along with Rechavam and they decided to split off. It had a very big underpinning, very profound reasons, as we will discuss. And the Haftorah of this week, which always reflects what is in the Pasha, the Haftorah in this week is from Yechezkel, where essentially the principle of the Haftorah is that Yechezkel should do something that will symbolize that the 2 kingdoms have united together and have become one under the rulership, under the reign of David, of Yehuda. We see that ultimately, in the time of the Geula, there's not going to be a split in the Jewish nation. There's going to be a single kingdom, and Yosef will also accept and will also join the Malchus Yehuda. And I said clearly, this is not just a political situation. There is great significance to this in terms of Avodas Hashem. Yehuda and Yosef are both Malachim. The Rambam explains that what is the function of a melech, of a king, in the Jewish nation. There is a political function, and then there is a leadership function. The melech is obligated to defend the nation against enemies. And the Melech is also has the function of strengthening and establishing Torah in the Jewish nation. This was the function of a Melech. Thus, Yehuda and Yosef both have that as their principal function. There's a difference between Yehuda and Yosef in terms of the approach and how they approach the whole union of Avodas Hashem. And this is why there were these two kingdoms. The Rebbe explains in the Sikha. Most of what I'm going to say is based on the Sikha, and many Sikhas perhaps. It's not exactly as the Sikha is presented, but basically the Inyan is from the Rebbe's Sikhas. There is a machloikis, there is a dispute, a discussion in the Gemara, in the Mishnayos actually. Which is greater? Talmud Godel or Maisa Godel? Meaning, Talmud learning, scholarship is greater than deed, or is deed greater than scholarship? And there were different opinions. And then it concludes, they came up, Nimnu V'Gomit says that they actually, so to speak, voted. And they came to the conclusion that Talmud Godel, that scholarship is greater, Shemei V'Lidei Maisa, because it brings, and it results, and it's instrumental to bring a person to Maisa, to deed. So, in simple terms, this is interpreted as meaning that clearly, if you don't know what to do, you can't do it. So you have to learn Shulchan Aruch in order to know what to do. So clearly Talmud has to come before Maisa. But this is not the full extent of this statement there. Because for this, you don't need scholars and Gemara to discuss that there is no way you can do something without knowing what to do. Any child can say that, can tell you that. So you need Talmud before Maisa. What it actually means is a much deeper inyan. And this deeper inyan is actually the principal lesson of Hanukkah. Surely over Hanukkah you have discussed and you learned that the trial of Hanukkah, the nisyonos of Hanukkah, and the whole, all the gzeiros, the decrees against Yidden on Hanukkah, again, were not political, were not just power struggles. They were principled, they were philosophical disputes, philosophical differences. And the Yevonim, the Greeks, wanted to superimpose their philosophy on the Jewish people. And what was the principle of their philosophy? It was that essentially all right and wrong, all good and bad, all truth exists right here in this physical world. And everything is based on human reason. And if you can find a human reason for keeping Shabbos, it's absolutely okay. You have no objection to that. And that goes along to all the mitzvahs, all the inyanim of Torah. They had no objection to the actual practice of mitzvahs, provided that they are based on human reason. And what's the big thing that they objected to? Why human reason? Not godly reason. Not something that is above and beyond world. This was the principal stance of the Greeks. And this is what they opposed in the Jewish Torah. Because Yidden, the principle of Yiddishkeit is just the opposite. The principle of Yiddishkeit is that there is no such thing as good and bad, right and wrong, except for the fact that Breishis Bara Elokim is Hashemayim v'Zoros, that is God who created the world. And therefore the world represents godly will. And by virtue of this fact, everything that we do has a good and bad, has a right and wrong, because there's a way that God wants it to happen and a way that God doesn't want it to happen. And everything has a godly quality to it. Surely, this was explained to you over Hanukkah, the words that we say in Al Hanisim, that the Greeks stood up and they said, L'hashkichem teirosecho. This is not new to you, I just want to mention it briefly, that the emphasis over there, that the Greeks wanted that we should abandon teirosecho, abandon Torah as being God's Torah. Torah per se, they had no objection to. But to proclaim that this is God's Torah, this is what they objected. Therefore, avodas Hashem, our life, when we have the two kingdoms, the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Yosef, whose principal function and purpose is avodas Hashem, the question is, what are the differences between them? The difference between them is how you approach avodas Hashem. And when the Gemara discusses which is greater, Talmud Godel or Maisa Godel, scholarship or Maisa or deed, and the conclusion is that Talmud Godel Shemei V'Lida Maisa, that scholarship is greater because it brings to deed. What is the inner meaning of that statement? It means that if you want to come to Maisa, to deed, not just to know what to do, but to deed that will be representing godly will, that will be a godly deed, then you have to have scholarship. Without scholarship, you will not have it. Why not? This is the scholarship of Torah. Because the world as such, and this was the Greeks' view, the world as such completely conceals godliness. The world as we know it, the natural world, the world today, up until such time when this veil will be removed, the world conceals godliness. There is nothing in the natural world that, in effect, says, if not for the application of human intellect, our own insight, that says that this phenomenon is held up, is a godly phenomenon. Everything can be explained in a totally natural and physical and worldly fashion. So that the physical world, the natural world, conceals godliness. And therefore, if we should approach the world without scholarship, which means without the insight of Torah, without the insight of the godly intellect that we have, there is no way that we can come to do Maisa. What Maisa? Not Maisa as the Greeks wanted, but Maisa as Yidden wanted. That the Maisa should be representing Hashem's will. There is no way, because you don't see Hashem in the world. And therefore you have to first have scholarship. You first have to delve into and to understand what the world is, to understand what Torah is, and then you can come to Maisa, the true Maisa, the Maisa, the deed as the Torah, as our Torah, as Yidden want to do it. This approach, this principle, as it says, is the approach of Yosef. Yosef represents scholarship. And this approach, as I said, starts from scholarship. Meaning that without scholarship, from the world itself, from the physical, from the perspective of the world itself, you cannot see godliness. And therefore you have to first have scholarship in order to have God in your deed, in order that your deed should be a Torah deed. This situation, that without scholarship, without study, without special insight, we do not see godliness. This situation is true throughout all ages, up until the time of Mashiach. And this is why in this parsha, Yosef was king, and Yehuda was approaching him. Even though Yehuda, we know, is the principal kingdom in the Jewish people. But during a time of Golus, and during the whole time of Birurim that we are going through, Golus throughout the ages, Yosef is the principal approach. And Yosef is king. Yosef is the approach that establishes Yiddishkeit in the world.
Learning.
I'm sorry?
Learning? Learning.
Because through learning is the only way that you can know and understand that there is godliness in the world. If we don't learn Bereshis, Bara Elokim Hashemayim v'Ha'aretz, that God created the world, we will not notice in the world itself that it has any godliness to it. Once we learn it, then we can see it. But it's all based on learning. And this is, in fact, the reason that when the kingdoms, when the people split up into the kingdoms, the nation split up into the kingdoms, the majority of the nation was in the kingdom of Yosef. Yehuda was just Yehuda and Binyamin, was a very small group. Because this is, in fact, what is applicable today. What is Yehuda? Yehuda's approach is totally different. Yehuda, as his name implies, represents the word moide. Like we say, moide ani lefonecha. And we discussed in the past the meaning of these words. The significance of the fact that we can wake up from sleep without opening a book, without studying, without going back to Bereshis, Bara Elokim Hashemayim v'Ha'aretz, without thinking of who created the world, what kind of world am I seeing. Just to wake up, and immediately we sense the union of Moed Ani Lefonech. I recognize, I submit that God is the one who returned my soul to me. Everybody knows the words Moed Ani Lefonech. That means that in our soul, in our souls, there is a higher quality what is known, what's called in Chassidus, the Etzem HaNefesh, the essence of the Neshama. The essence of the Neshama that speaks and illuminates a person's mind and heart without going through the intellect, without the need of explanation. Says, this is the way I see it, this is the way it is. And then he turns around and he sees the whole world operating on natural forces and natural laws, and he gets confused. And it doesn't make sense. And that's when he's not able to apply it directly, this moide. But in essence, this is how he sees it. This is the truth as he recognizes. Moide, I know the truth without studying it, without learning it, because I know it from my very soul. Yehuda, his approach to Avodas Hashem was direct from this spark, from this principle of the soul, directly to his relating to the whole world, to life in the world. This is the approach of Yehuda. David HaMelech, who is, as we said, this is the principle of kingdom in the Jewish people. And we say Malchus Yisrael, the Malchus, the Jewish Malchus, is represented by David. What is the principal expression of David that we know, that we have? Is Sefer Tehillim. It wasn't a scholarly book. Shlomo HaMelech has Mishlei, Shlomo HaMelech wrote Keheles, David has Tehillas Yisrael. He said Tehillim. David HaMelech was not a simpleton. He was not a simple Jew. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. And as he says that in the Sanhedrin, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. And the Gemara tells us that David and Achitophel, they were the two foremost scholars in the Jewish people. But David's principle, scholarship of course, but David's principle was this insight. His whole approach to life, his whole approach to identifying things in the world never concealed godliness to him. He saw it right through. He saw it straight to the soul of the world. And this is the meaning of Malchus Beis David, Malchus Yehuda, where the approach is Yehuda, Moide. The power of the soul is what directs me and tells me what the truth is. And the scholarship comes afterwards. So this is why there are these two kingdoms, because there are two approaches to Avodas Hashem. As we said before, it's not two approaches of how to do and how to act, because both are Jewish approaches, which means both incorporate that this is Torah Secho, this is God's Torah and God's mitzvahs, to which the Greeks are opposed regardless of who it was. But how do you find and how do you identify godliness in the world? There are two ways. Then, as we said in the Haftarah, it says that ultimately Yehuda and Yosef will corroborate and will unite into a single kingdom, soon in our time. And at that time, there will be a single kingdom under the rulership and reign of David. So this union, that is going to be a single kingdom under the rulership of David, has to be properly understood. Because superficially, again, one may think because Yosef will kind of accept David's rules. He will submit. Bin Nizbate. But that's not the point. The point is that he will actually merge and join with David. Why will Yosef merge and join with David? Because Le'osid Lovely, after we accomplish all that we are accomplishing with our effort now, the very nature of the world, the very physical world itself, will no longer conceal godliness. And it'll be perfectly obvious in every detail of the world, in every natural phenomenon, that it represents a godly presence. And when this comes, then we don't need scholarship anymore in order to do deed. Because scholarship, as we said, is needed in order to find out, to see, recognize God in the world. But when God is obvious, then we go straight to the Maisa, go straight to the deed. This phenomenon, this situation, that we're saying Le'osid Lovely, I want to discuss this a little bit, how we can relate to it and understand it. We know in a human being, the human being himself is what's called a miniature world, a microcosm of the whole world. The human being represents the world from the lowest elements of the world to the highest elements of the world. Everything is encompassed in this human being. In the human being himself, because that he encompasses everything, there are all of these elements. There's the natural world. There's the natural functions of the human body, which are perfectly natural. You eat, and the food gets digested, and gets incorporated in your bloodstream, and that's how you live. There is the intellect that lets you understand things. And the human being can be construed, can be understood as a perfectly natural phenomenon. Everything is kind of following natural course. He thinks of this, he wants it, he does it, he goes and eats it, and he consumes it, and so forth. But we know also that in this world of the human being, as natural as it may seem superficially, I'm sorry? On the surface. On the surface. How do you say in Russian superficial? Yeah. By observation. It seems all to work perfectly naturally. But then something kind of puts a wedge in that. You know what a wedge? It breaks the process. What we see is that there could be a perfectly healthy, bodily healthy human being, and everything functions perfectly, and the doctors cannot find anything is wrong. And because he lost spirit, everything ceases to function. It doesn't work. Just one little spirit, interest, will, and nothing. All his bodily functions cease to operate. Physically, he is a weakling. He can't even lift his arm. He can't even hold himself up. And he's perfectly healthy. Naturally, he's perfectly healthy. What does that tell us? After we recognize this, it tells us that when you see a healthy human being and operating and functioning and doing all that he's supposed to do, it's not a natural phenomenon. There is a spirit, there's a soul spirit that flows through every one of his actions, through every one of these natural details. And each one of these natural details represents some aspect of this spirit. And this is how it functions. And if not for that, it couldn't function. This is something which is, so to speak, a fact that we can observe, that happens. Because it is not the body that keeps a person healthy, it's the soul. And if, God forbid, there is some kind of a loss of the sense of the soul, of the neshama, of what the life is about, then the body ceases to operate. And loses all its strength. This illustrates for us in a microcosm, in a small fashion, what the truth is about the whole world. It appears to us that everything in the world works perfectly clockwise, by the rule. The sun rises on the moment, and the moon and the stars and the seasonal changes. Everything is just a perfectly natural cycle. This natural cycle, in every detail and every aspect of it, and every presence of anything physical, truly, actually represents a godly presence, a godly spirit. It's not a physical element on its own. Physical element on its own, without godly spirit, doesn't exist. As we're learning in the series that we're learning, that even the inanimate object also has a soul. The inanimate object is also essentially doing avodas Hashem. In the stone is doing avodas Hashem in being a stone. It's not just being a stone. And if not for the sense that he's doing avodas Hashem, he would cease to be. This is essentially, in brief, this principle that La'osid Lovoi. La'osid Lovoi does not mean far in the future, but in the near future, when we will have the Geula Shlema, when the world the truth of the world will be revealed, and it will be completely recognized. It's already recognized, but it will completely recognized. Huh?
What is Shlema?
Shlema. complete. Then the physical element of the world itself will tell you about God. You won't need scholarship to know about God. As it says, that when they'll come to Shabbos and the person will want to pick an apple from a tree, the tree will not let him. On Shabbos, I don't let you take my fruit. This is the world that we are anticipating. And this is the world that we personally, as a human being, we personally, internally are experiencing. This is the conflict that we have within ourselves. Here I wake up in the morning and I say Moedei Ani and everything is perfectly clear. And then I'll turn around and nothing is clear. How do I combine these two things? And this is where Avodas Hashem comes in. And we make an effort and we have a struggle. And our struggle is to bring the purity of our souls into our mind and heart and into our deed. So that every one of our actions will be actually motivated and directed by the true motivation of our souls, not of a natural nature, not like the Greeks wanted, but like the Jews wanted. Every one of our deeds will be understood to be a deed that relates directly to Hashem, directly to God. Because that's the source of all life. Just like now, we experience it ourselves, like I mentioned. Everything relates back to the soul. Without the soul, there is nothing. It could be a healthy body, and it's totally incapable of anything. I literally remember someone telling me an experience that he personally had. This going back many years. He personally had this experience where he was confined to bed and was perfectly healthy, and he was incapable of moving a limb, lifting up his hand. Didn't have that spirit and he couldn't do it. Had to start from scratch, revive himself. Coming back to ourselves here. It is very important and very helpful and should be also encouraging for all of us to understand what our struggle is all about. This is not an accidental struggle. You know what accidental means? Accidental means it didn't have to be. I'm accomplishing nothing. It should have been smooth, but by some mistake, it happened this way. It is a mistake. The mistake started from Chet Adam Harishon, and Adam Harishon ate from that fruit. But since then, that inyan we discussed in the past, Hadas, Toiv or Ra, once we recognize Toiv and Ra, once we recognize the natural world, there is no way we can bypass it until we actually transform it. We actually go into it and we work through every one of the details of the world. And we struggle through it. And this struggle This is the important thing. This struggle does not consist only in scholarship. Because ultimately, like we said in the human being, in a person, logically everything is healthy. But logic itself is just not enough to entice a person to act. It's not enough. The spirit is beyond logic. And this is why there's a struggle. Because it's not a question of understanding. Once I understand, everything is clear and it'll go automatically. No. You have to employ. You know what employ means? You have to use, bring to effect, to impress the power of the soul, to say, this is what I need to do. Not because I understand it, but because this is the truth. This is the way it has to be. I'm going against my natural inclination. I'm going against the natural view of the world. It's superficially against. But in fact, this is what will give it life. This is what will make it real. This is what will give it spirit and what will give it true meaning. And will make it last and make it true. We always speak, I'm sure you've heard it multiple times, the concept of Kabbalas Oil Malchus Shamayim. Accepting the yoke of heaven. It should not be misunderstood that the yoke of heaven means that you take the yoke and you're totally not involved in it. You just follow the driver who pulls the reins. Accepting the yoke of heaven means that you know that there is a higher spirit, a higher truth than your intellect is able to understand. And you want to relate to that spirit. You want to relate to that truth. You want that the world should have a true meaning to you. Your life should be for real. It should not be just a natural thing that superficially works, but internally doesn't work. It's meaningless. So that this struggle is a personal struggle for each one of us. But the accomplishment of it is not just personal, that it makes you happy. The accomplishment of it, that it transforms the whole world. The Alter Rebbe explains that Yidden, in general, the Jewish nation as such, this represents the total chayus, the total life force, godly life force in the world. And every Yid has his portion in the world that lives, so to speak, and gets its highest from him. And every time that he stands up he breaks through the natural veil, the natural darkness, and he brings light into his life, he automatically brings light into the world around him. I want to tell you a brief story. There are thousands and tens of thousands of stories. This story just came to my mind that would illustrate this point. There was a Yid that I personally knew. He's not here anymore. He was a Rav in some Midwestern town. Today, Midwest doesn't mean a Jewish desert, but then it really meant a desert. And when he was a Rav over there, and he needed chinuch for his children, he needed school for his children. In his town and his surrounding, there was no. He had to drive every day, if I remember correctly, 2 hours each way to take his children to school and bring them back. That's not. He wasn't just a driver. He was a Rav in the town. And so he found a couple of other families that were willing to do it, and that way they kind of divided this burden. This is a tremendous burden. 4 hours a day of driving is a tremendous burden. And they divided. They had a carpool. It was very, very difficult. He himself related to me the story. It was very, very difficult. He, the whole time, as the Rav in town, he was trying the whole time to impress upon people that they should finance a school locally. There was no buyers. They weren't interested. This couple of people were there, and that was it. So he had to take his children in that distance. It really reflected on his health. It was very difficult. Then came a situation where actually this was not his day to take the children, it was somebody else's day. And this other person called him up and said that he cannot do it. Whatever it is, an emergency came up, he can't do it. He himself, when the day that he had to drive, he would schedule other things off, so he would have the koiches to do it. Here he was completely burned in the normal day's affairs. In addition to that, he had to do the driving. He had no choice, so he drove. He drove the supernatural koiches to take the kids over there. He brought the kids to school. Once he parked the car and the kids got out of the car, he fainted. He fainted. He fainted. He lost it. It was beyond his koiches. He said to me that when I woke up from that faint, I knew that we broke it through. We broke through the ice. We broke through this barrier. The next weekend, he had a meeting with the people, and he stood up and he made a speech for the school, and he had a school. Sometimes it becomes very trying, but every trial is a trial that it was a breakthrough. You have to understand, these other people were not involved in his trials. But it changed the whole perspective of the world. One Yid stands up with Mesiras Nefesh, he affects his whole environment, his whole surrounding. He brings light and life to all people that in his environment. The Rebbe used to urge, during the time when Russia was still communist, and the Yidden in Russia struggled as no one else ever struggled, and no one else should ever know from it. And the Rebbe used to say that every time that a Yid here in America does something special, is Mahader b'mitzvah, this helps the Yidden out there in Russia. He gives them strength, and it lightens their burden. This is what this struggle that each one of us has is all about. This is what should inspire us to understand that every time we stand steadfast, we continue despite the difficulties, whether they're emotional difficulties, intellectual difficulties, we're just plain bored, we're just discouraged, whatever presentation it comes with. If we break through it, we bring light to ourselves, and we eliminate that source of darkness. And with this process in Mitzvah Hashem, we will bring light to each one of us, and to the whole of Seagate, and to the whole of Brooklyn, to the whole of New York, to the whole of the United States, and to the whole world.
Mashiach now. Mashiach.